Thank you, Kate. Like I said earlier, this conference is a co-production of two organizations, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and Democracy at Work Institute. So I want to tell you a little bit about both organizations and why we're here. So the Democracy at Work Institute, or DAWI, is a partner organization of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and is the only national organization dedicated to expanding the field of employee ownership as a strategy to address economic and racial inequality. We aim to use worker cooperatives and other employee-owned forms as a means for people locked out of good jobs and business ownership opportunities to build wealth, voice, and access. With a focus on immigrants, women, workers of color, and low-wage workforces, DAWI demonstrates effective development practices and enables their uptake. Then we work to embed support at the systems level. Through research, innovation, and education, we make the real work of the future, which truly values workers and helps build resilient, equitable local economies. The U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, our parent organization, is the only national grassroots membership organization for worker co-ops and democratic workplaces. Their mission is to propel a just, equitable economy and sustainable communities through the advancement of workplaces that are owned, managed, and governed by workers. The Federation represents over 300 member workplaces, that's you all on the line, and directly employs thousands of workers across the country. With a focus on membership and advocacy, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives connects our member co-ops to member benefits, such as dental, such as health. We connect our members to these benefits and to a larger economic justice movement. The Federation builds power with national and international partners to increase economic justice through community-based shared ownership. I'd like to take a moment to thank the staff and the board of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and the staff and board of Democracy at Work Institute. This was truly a team effort to bring you the Worker Cooperative National Conference. We learned new skills, we organized our partners, and we are just so glad to have you here at our virtual conference this year. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague, Shravanti Daniel, to lead us with a welcome and poem.
Thank you, Rudlin, and welcome everybody. I'd like to share our intro video from our members.
Hi, we are
Cooperative Home Care Associates,
and we are from
the Bronx, New York.
We're Fertile Ground Cooperative out of Oklahoma City.
We are Aorta and we're from all over the place.
Hi, we're Slice, New York and Silicon Valley.
Hola, somos Bradley por Richmond de Staten Island, Nueva York.
We are Capital Home Care Co-op from Washington State.
Welcome to the Worker Co-op Conference.
Welcome to day 2, everybody. Glad to be here.
Community wealth. Worker-led cooperatives.
The future of work looks like empowerment and equity for all.
The future of work looks like principled, joyful, anti-capitalist struggle.
The future of work in home care will be workers coming out of the shadows and behind closed doors.
We will step into the light and be visible to all. Home care work will be fully recognized as essential, and workers will be afforded the protections they rightly deserve as a result of that designation.
The future of work looks like us, supporting one another.
Brian les da la bienvenida a la conferencia 2020.
¡Arriba las cooperativas!
Welcome, everybody. My name is Shravanti Daniel. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at DAWI. I'm excited to be here with you. I'm going to share a poem written by Sonia Sanchez to kick off our day. Also, her birthday, she just celebrated her 86th birthday this September. This poem is titled An Anthem. Our vision is our voice. We cut through country where madmen goose step in tunes to Guarnica. We are people made of fire. We walk with ceremonial breaths. We have condemned talking mouths. We run without legs. We see without eyes. Loud laughter breaks over our heads. Give me courage so I can spread it over my face and mouth. We are secret rivers with shaking hips and crests. Come awake in our thunder so that our eyes can see behind the trees. For the world is split wide open and you hide your hands behind your backs. For the world is broken into little pieces and you beg with tin cups for life. Are we not more than hunger and music? Are we not more than harlequins and horns? Are we not more than color and drums? Are we not more than anger and dance? Give me courage so that I can spread it over my face and mouth. We are the shakers walking from top to bottom in a day. We are like Shango, involving ourselves in acts that bring life to the middle of our stomachs. We are coming towards you, madmen, shredding your death talk, standing in front with mournings around our waist. We have inherited our prayers from the rain, our eyes from the children of Soweto. Red rain pours over the land and our fire mixes with the water. Give me courage so that I can spread it over my face and mouth. Thank you, Sonia Sanchez. Beautiful poem. I'd love to welcome Ana Martina, who will switch to Spanish language. Welcome, Ana.
Gracias, Shanti. Un poema.
Thank you, Shavanti, for such a beautiful poem by Sonia Sanchez. And this brings us to remember Salvador Allende's words 45 years ago in Chile. We make our own history. Yesterday, this is a day for cooperatives. Yesterday was a full day with the presence of Talita Rashida y otro congresista de Nueva York. We also heard from Bernie Sanders, a senator from Vermont, who has also been a strong promoter of democracy in the workplace. And we began with the conversation, which was facilitated by Stephen Kelly between Naomi Klein and Ari Lewis about the economic crisis in Argentina that led to a very strong cooperative movement, which spread throughout the Southern Cone. And these businesses that were taken over by workers finally became co-ops and strengthened the co-op movement in Argentina. And here we are today in 2020, in the midst of an economic crisis, a global pandemic that is being experienced worldwide and throughout our country. And this actually leads us to look for alternatives as co-ops. And with everybody who's here today at this conference are implementing democratic practices to help us change our destiny. Yesterday, we were also hearing about different kinds of strategies to build businesses and different models for co-ops. We heard about financial accountability and many details about that. There was also a conversation about the new Green Deal as also another way to deal with the economic situation and crisis. And as well, we heard about how cooperative businesses are participating in these new alternatives and what it means to make these new alternatives accessible to Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and to have cooperatives involved in economic and racial justice and equity. There are also many nonprofit organizations who have been trying to democratize more their workplaces and making their workspaces more horizontal. We also had a session with Esteban Kelly about anti-racist practices in the workplace. It was a very full day, and today will be the same. We will also have conversations that will bring to light the needs of essential workers and the work and commitments of cooperatives to build economic and racial justice. We will be hearing from Maurice Mitchell, who is the National Director of the Working Families Party, and also people from the Black Lives Matter movement. And we are going to be switching now back into English and giving the mic to Natty, or to Rodlin first.
Martina, for that recap of such an eventful morning yesterday, such an eventful day with you all. We had over 1,300 people watching the live stream and interacting in our breakout sessions yesterday afternoon, and we are just so thankful for everyone that showed up and continues to participate in our virtual conference. So now I am going to pass the mic to Flecker Vera, the board member of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, who's going to introduce a video. We will now transition to Spanish translation.
Compañeros, ¿me pueden escuchar?
Can y'all hear me?
I'm having some technical issues with the camera, but estoy muy contento de estar aquí con ustedes, muy
But
emocionado.
I'm very happy and excited to be with you today, to be here today, and to see how we can all work together to create this new world in the workplace through worker-owner co-ops, and to build sustainable work co-ops. I'm an undocumented immigrant, and I understand very well economies in vulnerable communities. So I would like to proudly introduce Congressman Mark Pocan, who is a union member and facilitator and proponent of progressive causes. And we will show a video where Mark will address everybody. And he is also a proponent of cooperatives.
Hi, I'm Congressman Mark Pocan, and it's a pleasure to be with you virtually for the Worker Co-op Conference. As co-chair of the Congressional Cooperative Business Caucus, I'm proud to educate my colleagues in Congress about the importance of worker cooperatives. There are an estimated 800 worker co-ops across the country, with an increase in interest since Congress passed the Main Street Employee Ownership Act in 2018. My state of Wisconsin has been a leader in the cooperative development, with 649 total cooperatives, which have created 18,970 jobs. We're proud to be home to 21 established worker co-ops, such as Just Coffee Cooperative, the Interpreters Cooperative of Madison, and Isthmus Engineering and Manufacturing Cooperative. In this moment of crisis, co-ops in Wisconsin and across the country are creating quality jobs, building community wealth, protecting the environment, reducing poverty, and strengthening local economies. Thank you for all the work to advance worker cooperatives.
Bueno, le damos las gracias
Thank you. Thank you, Mark Pocan, for his work. And now I'm going to turn it over to Zen, who will be speaking in English.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zen Trenholm, and I manage the Shared Equity and Economic Development Fellowship Program at the Democracy at Work Institute, where I help cities implement worker ownership strategies through changes to policy and practice. Now more than ever, our cities are looking to worker ownership to build community resilience and a path towards an equitable economic recovery, but they need support. We're grateful for the leadership of Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents California's 17th Congressional District, located in the heart of Silicon Valley, who is working to increase federal support for worker ownership so that cities and communities around the nation can build and grow worker cooperatives to meet their needs. I'm pleased to introduce a recorded message by Representative Khanna for our conference.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ro Khanna. Thank you for your advocacy on worker co-ops. I plan to introduce federal legislation to empower worker co-ops. This is so important as we're approaching the silver tsunami with so many baby boomers retiring. Baby boomers own the majority of businesses currently, and almost 1 in 6 workers are employed by these businesses. We need to make sure as they retire that there is a plan for these businesses. My legislation would encourage as many of these businesses to consider becoming co-ops. We know co-ops work, we know they empower employees, and we should make sure that small businesses with retiring boomers have the opportunity to look at becoming co-ops. Thank you for your advocacy. Look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you, Representative Khanna. And now I'd like to pass the mic back to Rudlin.
Thank you, Zen, and thank you to our congressmen and women who submitted their videos, congratulating us on our conference and really showing us that the worker ownership and employee ownership is important to integrate into our political system. So now we are going to walk through what to expect of the conference and the layout of the conference. Daniel, can you pull up our slideshow? So you're here again. Welcome to the conference. We're so glad you've joined us, and we look forward to having you with us for a couple more hours. Next, Daniel. Next. So next slide. So here's what to expect today. So after this, I will introduce our keynote. And after our keynote, we're going to take a short break from 2:30 to 3 o'clock Eastern time. There'll be a 30-minute break. Starting at 3 p.m. to 4:30 Eastern time, we will transition into our breakout sessions. There are 4 sessions for you all to join today, and there's only 1 block of sessions. After our session block, we will close out the conference with a brief outro, and then we'll have a live DJ for the evening to ease you into the weekend and to celebrate a successful conference with you all. Next slide, Daniel. Again, if there's any questions or if you need any support throughout the conference, please do not hesitate to call us. We have folks waiting to answer your question in both English and in Spanish. You can see the numbers up on the screen right now. We also have an email address if you want to send an email to conference@institute.coop to ask any questions, and we will respond as soon as we can. Please, if you have any questions throughout the conference, please do not hesitate to call us or to email us so we can get you a response. In addition, we do have the membership Slack. If you haven't joined Slack yet, this is where a lot of the conversations are happening. People are networking, people are giving highlights of their day, what has been insightful and inspiring for them, all on our Slack. If you go to conferences.coop, our website, you can find more information on how to join the conversation on our Slack. We also invite you to check us out on our social media. At USFWC Info is our handle on Twitter and Instagram, and at US Worker is the handle on Facebook for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. At Institute_Co-op is the handle on Twitter, and at Institute.coop is the handle on Facebook for the Democracy at Work Institute. Please tag us in your tweets, share your experiences throughout the conference, share pictures, show us what you're doing so we can celebrate this glorious conference with you all. The hashtags we are using for the conference is hashtag Worker Co-ops 2020 and hashtag Cooperativas de Trabajadores 2020 in Spanish. Please use these hashtags so we can see your tweets, and your posts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And now I'm going to pass the microphone to the Executive Director of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, Esteban Kelly, who will introduce the keynote.
Thanks so much, Rudlin. I sure will. And thanks again to our sponsors and to our board members, some of whom you've gotten to hear from today and also yesterday. I want to frame up the conversation that we're about to have as there's a through line, as a bridge from yesterday to today. That's very intentional. And it builds on our theme of the work of the future. You heard from my counterpart at the Democracy at Work Institute, Melissa Hoover. You heard from her yesterday about the ways that we're thinking about the work of the future as both about the work of building the future, like the labor and the creativity and the organizing that goes into that, and also about what the workers are, what kind of jobs and workplaces and industries will be trending in the future, and how the organizing we're doing today is a bridge to that. So today's conversation really is looking at that from a different aspect. We were really grounded in the pandemic crisis yesterday, the crisis internationally around sort of global systems, the global economic crisis. And I think today we're actually taking a much more rooted look at movement building, at community organizing, and the crisis around anti-Black racism and attacks on communities of color. One of the ways that we're thinking about that, right, is the crisis of not just the ways that this pandemic has heightened an economic crisis, but an existing and long-standing crisis created by racial capitalism that has produced an enormous wealth gap between Black and Brown communities and our white and affluent counterparts. And so the work of the future is both about addressing the demographics of the future. Our conversation this afternoon is actually going to feature voices from throughout, especially the Black diaspora, from Nigerian voices, Jamaican voices, Trinidadian voices, African American, and even Cuban and Colombian voices, right, as part of this conversation. And I think that that's locating the leadership that we need right now in the organizing that we're doing, and connecting it to who the future demographics are within the U.S. And even already what a lot of our leadership looks like inside of our organizing for economic democracy. The fight for a just future, and we made this pretty clear yesterday, but we're connecting that today. The fight for a just future is going to require movements for racial and economic justice and cooperative.
Were you waiting for me to finish?
There's some background noise there. To form strong coalitions, right? For exchange and for maximum impact. And so that's why I'm excited to welcome our featured speaker, keynote speaker, Maurice Mitchell here, who is a longtime friend of mine. We both grew up as West Indians on Long Island doing progressive organizing, and also our moderator for this conversation, Nati Linares. So let me say a little bit about who they are, and they will actually take it from there and transition us into the panel discussion. So Nati, who's going to be coming on screen in a moment, is the communications organizer with the New Economy Coalition. She grew up in, well, you grew up on the island of Shaolin, known as Staten Island, in New York City. This is a New York trifecta. I don't know that we planned that very intentionally, but all three of us are like, oh yeah, this is New York. I no longer live in New York, but you know. And you know, being from Staten Island, it's both the world's largest garbage dump and the oldest continuously inhabited free Black community in the United States. So Nati is the child of Cuban and Colombian immigrants and comes to the solidarity economy movement after at least a decade, maybe more, of witnessing inequities in the music and media industries, while working with diasporatical artists of all kinds from various diasporas. Nati tells the stories of people resisting capitalism and building new systems, especially those creating a culture of revolution. So hi, Nati, thanks for joining us here today. And Maurice, who's gonna be back on camera in a moment, is a nationally recognized social movement strategist, a visionary leader in the movement for Black lives, and a community organizer for racial, social, and economic justice. Maurice was born and raised in New York to Caribbean working class parents, full solidarity there, and began organizing as a teenager and never stopped. It's obvious why we have a vibe. At Howard University, Maurice witnessed and was part of an organizing effort after a classmate was killed by police officers, and really led organizing efforts against police brutality and for divestment from private prisons. Maurice went on to work as an organizer for the Long Island Progressive Coalition, which Nati also organized at. Downstate organizer, you were also downstate organizer for Citizen Action of New York, director of the New York State Civic Engagement Table, and currently Maurice is a key organizer for the Movement for Black Lives. And you are right now, as of 2018, I believe, the director for the Working Families Party, which I think is important when we're thinking about building our political power, making sure that we're mobilized and articulating not just for electoral things, but for the kind of policy platforms and campaigns and mobilizations, right? And so it's very intentional that we're hearing from a leading voice from one of the most significant national political parties in the United States. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna pass the mic to Nati, and we're gonna hear this conversation, which is framed about building a people's economy.
Thank you, Esteban. Thank you for that introduction and that framing. Islanders in the house, Staten Island, Long Island. The Long Island Progressive Coalition is a member of the New Economy Coalition, where I do communications. We're also the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops and the Democracy at Work Institute are also members. So I love the kind of full circle and the paths that we're connecting today. So welcome again, everybody. Yes, we're about to have a conversation. The fight for a just future will require movements for racial and economic justice, as Esteban pointed out, as well as cooperative organizers to form strong coalitions for exchange and impact. The time is now to build a people's economy. And so Maurice is going to share some remarks around how we will get there and frame for us the stakes of seizing this historical moment to build a better economy that's fighting anti-Black racism, that's building wealth in communities of color. And then we're going to bring in some voices from on the ground who I'll introduce after Maurice's comments. So thank you all again for everyone putting in work. Make sure that you're tweeting at Worker Co-ops 2020 so we can find you and retweet you and continue the conversation. So thank you, Maurice. Please, let's take it away.
Well, thank you, Nati, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maurice Mitchell. I am the National Director of the Working Families Party, and I want to thank you, Nati, and the New Economy Coalition. Esteban, we go way back, and really proud of all the work that you're doing with the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. Also, want to thank the Democracy at Work Institute for inviting me to speak today. And it's a real pleasure to be here and be in community with so many like-minded folks. And you know, I sit before you today as the leader of a political party, and I sit before you 53 days from the biggest election of our lifetime, arguably the most consequential election in this moment in our world. And I know it's very cliche, and sometimes I cringe when I hear people say this is the most important election of our lifetime, election after election. However, y'all, this is the most important election of our lifetime. And so I feel that very much happening at the same time that we are in the largest movement moment of our lifetime. And I'm both proudly the National Director of the Working Families Party and proudly an organizer within the Movement for Black Lives. So thinking about that, that tension between the prerogatives of movement and the prerogatives that are being set before us in November on the ballot. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to expand the conversation, because even with fascism threatening to kick down the doors of our democracy, I'm not simply here to tell you to go and vote. And I want to make that clear out in the front, right? That this is not a go out and vote message, because building movements and building lasting durable power isn't contingent on winning or losing one election or winning or losing 100 elections. I want to talk to you all today about democracy. And my hope is that by the time it's over, what we think of as democracy, particularly in the context of organized labor, the political process and our society, we could expand that definition. Now, our ideological opponents have engaged in and benefited from a decontextualizing and a narrowing of the definition of democracy. People on the right, organized labor, white nationalists, will often try to cast institutions of higher education or even the process of critical thinking in general as leftist tools. But the reality is that they take words and ideas very, very seriously and work very hard to define terms. And they're well disciplined in doing so. It's one reason why we find ourselves playing defense so much, responding to claims from the far right, no matter how ridiculous and false they are. It's one of the reasons why the 1619 Project of the New York Times, that work of scholarship and that work of journalism, for example, is so threatening to them. The governing myths of the founding of this nation, the story of the settler colonial project, the winners and losers in that history are essential to power and control today. Ideas, language, terms, they matter, they really matter. So look how they've whittled down our definition of democracy, for example. People would have you think that democracy is limited to voting, that the very highest form of participatory democracy is showing up on election day, pulling the lever for your candidate of choice, going home, watching the returns on TV, and coming back 4 years later to do the same thing. That's it. That's the job. That's your civic duty. But if we're to succeed and build the country we deserve, one that cares for and cares about everyone, we need a different definition of democracy, one that's much broader. And I believe that definition actually starts with all of you, with workers and with organized labor. You all know this better than most people. We spend most of the time at work. Most of our time is spent at work. And if we're advocating for democracy in spaces outside of our workplace, but our workplace isn't democratic, and we don't have a say in how that workplace is run or how we manage the profit of our labor, or how we could be full participants in the work that we do, how can we truly be full participants in democracy? We find ourselves accepting things that are objectively not okay and sometimes blatantly wrong because we earn a living from the institution that is mistreating us. We sometimes lead ourselves to believe that we shouldn't have a say, and that as long as the check clears, we can endure one wrong until one wrong turns into two, until two turns into three. So if we are to live in a fully democratic society, that has to change. If we don't raise our voices and organize for change in our workplaces, we don't live in a democratic society, full stop. If most of our waking hours are spent in a hierarchical dynamic at work, where management is stealing our labor and profiting off of it, that isn't democracy. In fact, that is the definition of capitalism. And there should be a tension there between a democratic society and capitalism. So the fight for true democracy involves multiple fronts. Sure, you participate in democracy by casting a vote, and I run a political party and I'm very involved in that. But you also participate in a democracy by withholding your labor through strikes or by collectively organizing your labor through worker co-ops or unions. This is a virtuous cycle. The actions we take inside our workplace also make it easier to engage in protest, direct action, or vote people in or out through the political process. All of this is connected, and we should utilize all of these together. They should be nested together in one strategy that forms a common North Star. We, and I'm talking about the broader society, tend to think about these things in silos, tend to think about these things as separate activities. And that doesn't make any sense. We think about voting in a vacuum, or direct action in a vacuum, or workers organizing in a vacuum. These things, all of these things, could and should work in concert. You know, I was told during the preparation of this keynote that the members here vote at a rate of 80%. Outside of that being an amazing statistic, it is also a sign that y'all are engaging in democracy every day, inside and outside of work. And we need more of that, because if we don't have democratic movements and democratic organizations, at a certain point, our institutions and our movements collapse. That includes workplace democracy. That is at the core of building the type of vibrant democracy, so our institutions could be vibrant as well, so our movements could be vibrant and nimble and consultative and democratic as well. They collapse because the internal democracy of our movements aren't rigorous, aren't inclusive, aren't vibrant. And so the work of worker democracy in various workplaces, scaling up this muscle around internal democracy, means that our movements can be more democratic. When everyday working class people are at the table in their workplace, making the decisions about how that workplace best meets the needs for the many and not the privileged few at the top, is preparing working people to lead in all segments of life. The type of democracy you all engage in daily can be scaled to transform society. Now, organized labor in general and worker co-ops specifically are creating the conditions and modeling what it looks like where a mass of people actually deal with the challenges and conflicts and contradictions that come with deciding how the workplace should be run. Those same skills and organizing principles can be, and I would say must be, applied everywhere. Those same skills of wrestling with those contradictions, of dealing with real conflict, real difference, and then coming together to resolve that every day, day in, day out. Like the workplace, there is no mass movement of people that ever got their goals accomplished or demands met without dealing with the nuances and contradictions of tactics or ideology. People within movements have to struggle together, that beautiful struggle, that principled struggle, in order to come up with common sense solutions. And it's important to say that simply coming together to accomplish a goal without looking deeper into the future can leave a movement's goals incomplete. And I want to really dig in here. And that's why voting or coming together to vote, just simply vote in one candidate or vote out one candidate, in and of itself is an incomplete form of democracy, because it's focused on a proximal goal and not on the North Star. So I want to give some examples here. Look at the uprising that became known as the Arab Spring, and we're going to focus on one country. Many forces came together in a united front that included factions of the left all across multiple countries. Students and workers and concerned citizens, they took to the streets and toppled dictators. But that takedown left a power vacuum. So let's focus on Egypt, for example, where it's true, they toppled a dictator. And that power vacuum was first filled by the theocratic far right, and then eventually filled by the military. The military was able to step in Egypt where the nascent movement was not, because it had already developed the capacity to be able to fill that vacuum immediately. We've also seen these power vacuums filled in similar ways right here in the United States. So I'd like to give an example through my work in the movement for Black Lives. After Mike Brown was murdered in 2014, Taser International, a manufacturer of body cameras, stepped in within weeks and convinced the public and governments that the way to police accountability was through first-person video of police misconduct. 6 years and millions of dollars spent later, body-worn cameras have gotten us no closer to police reform or police accountability. It has lined the pockets of Taser and allowed us to watch countless people's final moments as a result of police violence, and also has provided a market for social media platforms that make money off of the countless retweeting and replaying of those videos. But it hasn't solved the underlying structural issues of racial justice at the core of anti-Black racism and racial capitalism. So these incidents and these examples are instructive, and so is the mentality of our opponents who push these destructive ideas in a crisis. The late economist Milton Friedman laid the blueprint on the right for pushing through drastic pro-corporate anti-people campaigns in these times of crises, when people need us to step up most for transformative change. And he said, I'm going to quote, "Only in a crisis, actual or perceived, produce real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around." That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable, end quote. He was wrong on policy, but absolutely right in his power analysis. Now, we are in the midst of a historic crisis. Calling it a crisis is probably an understatement. If you watch Marvel movies, this is the Infinity War of existential crises, where racial, economic, and climate inequalities have come together for untold amounts of destruction. And it's not by chance. This is the nature of capitalism. We don't know the form of the crisis. We don't know exactly when the crisis hits, but under capitalism, we are sure that there will be crisis, and there will be more crises up ahead as long as neoliberal capitalism exists. Now, organizations and activists and concerned citizens have taken to the streets to protest this injustice and these crises, to demand better. And the largest protest movement in our nation's history is vibrant. So as Dr. Strange said, to complete the Marvel Universe analogy, we're in the end game now. The same way our ideological adversaries look to push through policies in times of crisis, we have to be ready with the alternative vision to present to the people. When we topple these systems and heads of states who don't have our best interests at heart, our mission is twofold: develop the systems that allow us to build power to make the world we want to live real, while dismantling the structures that don't have our best interests at heart. Dual power. They will be known for what they destroy, who they harm, and how ruthlessly they loot from us. We will be known by what we build. Building this two-part system also allows us to broaden our definition of democracy by moving from defense to offense. So often, we find ourselves in the defensive, defending our right to collectively bargain, defending reproductive justice, protesting police violence, organizing to get our elected officials not to do something. And we find ourselves playing defense because the entity that is most in formation in society is organized capital. Organized capital has the money and capacity to move things and to make things move across and under steep obstacles. The solution to that is the two-step solution to organize and build worker power. Only then will have a sufficient answer and sufficient capacity in order to challenge the interests of organized capital and to be able to move from defense to offense. An organized body of workers can propose permanent protections for collective bargaining, can fortify reproductive justice through legislation, can propose increases to the minimum wage and worker protections, and propose structural changes that permanently constrain capital. We must move from defending what we don't want to lose to proposing what we want to gain for a better world and more just world. Now, building worker power won't happen overnight or by magic, and you know this, nor will it happen solely through changes in demographics. This is also why voting and only voting is insufficient to build the movement and the society of our dreams. Organized capital is durable and can withstand singular shifts. We've seen this in South Africa. In South Africa, you have a majority Black country with primarily Black elected officials, but an economy run by wealthy white elites, white minority capital, who make up around 10% of the population. So let me say that again. On the surface, South Africa is everything some of us say we'd like to have. Leadership that looks like and reflects the demographics of the nation. Yet the representation is skin deep because organized capital has found a way to give the people what they think they want without giving up much power. Black people in office, while capital is very much still in power. That's why this next generation of the movement has to negotiate and carry a series of both ands, not a series of siloed steps or either ors. A real democratic society requires us to boldly participate in democracy beyond voting and build democratic structures within and outside of the electoral system and electoral politics. It is about owning production and owning our labor through co-ops or unions, so we could set the table for fair wages and working conditions and sit at the table with management instead of having policies made for us, or build from the ground up whole new relations where management is not necessary. As I mentioned earlier, this type of organizing and power building can be scaled if we realize our worth and power and begin making decisions in the workplace where we spend most of our time. Where else can we make those decisions? This is why I say vote and protest and organize and study and strike, working people on all fronts of struggle. The same people that leave the job site hit the protest, send in their ballot, sharpen their analysis, and hit the strike line. When we run our workplaces, demanding the changes we want to see in our communities from those elected to represent us, that it no longer feels far-fetched. And notice that I said I didn't say asking, I said demanding. When we run our workplaces, because we're effectively organized ourselves and we effectively have seized power in some respect, we can make real demands. We can make real demands on capital and real demands on political power. And if those demands aren't met in our community, running for office as a worker leader no longer seems like a job for other people, because it is a job for us. When we run our workplaces, we have gone from being the governed to those doing the governing. And when we have both democratic workplaces and a democratic government, we will have built a society and institutions that is ultimately accountable and responsive to we, the people. And that is ultimately how we get free. Thank you.
Wow, right on time, Maurice. I was about to turn my camera on and give you the signal, but thank you so much, Juice. There, it's a big picture. You brought in the global. You brought in a big vision, a broader definition of democracy. You talked about false solutions versus reforms, the multiple fronts of struggle, dual power, demands. I like to think of a quote by Namaka Agbo, who talks about doing direct action and also tilling the land for what we hope to come, which I think is such an important duality to hold in this moment. So I want to bring in and expand the conversation and bring in two organizers on the ground who are kind of actually on the ground on the offensive, I would say, to bring in your language. Who are doing political projects and initiatives that are practical, inspiring, and I would say game-changing in the cooperative movement right now. And then later on, we'll get into a conversation together about where we can go from here and truly building this people's economy and truly building a mass movement. So is Philip on the line? I'm going to bring in Philip here, who is with the Democracy at Work Institute's Legacy Business Initiative, where he is focused on developing sustainable financing models for employee ownership broadly. Philip has more than 10 years of experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, and is focused on successfully advising businesses. And again, this is an example of scalable transition of wealth from white business owners to people of color worker owners happening right now. So Philip, can you kind of chime in based on what you heard from Maurice and tell us a little bit more about what you all are doing at the Legacy Business Initiative?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having us here. And so Maurice touched on so much. And so the Legacy Business Fund, the project is really, I think the Congress has spoken about the 1 in 6 workers that are in these business owned by baby boomers. And what that translates to is $10 trillion worth of assets. And so in a very real way, this is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity to transfer wealth for the first time to Black and brown workers. And so the Legacy Fund is set up to do just that. And it's to allow those business owners who are trying to find a way to exit the opportunity to become employee owned. And explicitly, we are focused on industries and businesses that employ Black and brown folks. And I think if we can, we're here to demonstrate that that works at scale as we build toward the new economy. And I think to touch on Maurice's point, in a very real way, as you can imagine, a lot of the work we do relies upon talking to sort of the investor class and the capital class. And the work on the ground in the movements, the organizing, we can see in a real way that it's having an effect. And it's allowing, I think, the holders of capital to come to this realization that the way the economy is set up right now doesn't work. And it won't work long term. And it has, massive societal ills. And so now people are open to and seeking ways to invest in a way that aligns with their values of a new economy. And it is, so we are very much in a real way with this initiative standing on the shoulders of those organizers and those protesters and trying to take the offensive and catalyze sort of what a new economy can look like.
Amazing. Can you paint a picture for someone who's been on the streets, who's involved with the movement for Black Lives, what this looks like tangibly? Is there an example that you can kind of paint a picture where you've seen this transfer happen for us?
Sure. So I'll talk about, I'll give a business example to kind of, give a highlight to work, and I'll give an investor example, which I think you may be referring to as well. So a business example, I mean, if you're a business owner and you've built a business over 10, 20, 30 years, as you come around to retirement, you're faced with a few options. One is you could sell your business to a private equity firm, and who knows what happened. They could close, they could change the name, they could fire everybody, they could outsource the jobs. That's a terrible outcome. You also could just be forced to just close, like you're tired. And that also results in job losses, lost wages. So we're trying to introduce a third option, which is, hey, you can sell your business to your workers and convert to a worker-owned ESOP. And so for us, it's important that when that happens, and this is directly to Maurice's point, embedding into a workforce that has worked under a traditional environment, the ideas of democratic governance, open book management. And I mean, Maurice spoke about sitting at the table with management. I think our view of the world is workers should be management. And that's sort of how we see it. And then on the investor side, it's fascinating. I mean, even like just this week, there was a new stock exchange announced for long-term investing. That's never happened before. Stock exchanges are notoriously short-term. And people are waking up to this notion that when you're super short-term and you're focused on profits, it's not going to work in the long term. And so you're now seeing foundations, other impact investors actually invest with a racial equity lens, actually invest in a way that moves against inequality. I think the message we're carrying to them is, if you want to fight racial justice, if you want to fight inequality, and you want to do it in a true sustainable way that keeps jobs in the places where they are, you have to use employee ownership and worker cooperatives as your core thesis, and we're trying to enable that to be so.
What would you like to see more of from here? I think this panel is even a great representation of these worlds coming together and moving and making advances between the cooperative movement and movements on the ground. What would you want to see more of now in this work, and what are you looking ahead to in the years to come?
I think I want to see more of conversations like this, like conversations with folks who are doing the organizing, folks who are, leading projects. That's what it takes. I mean, even in our own space, there are other folks facilitating employee ownership. And I mean, what we can't do is exactly Maureen's point. We can't all be in silos. So even our project has to work with other projects that are doing, worker cooperatives at the startup stage, because it's important. And we need to sort of present this full picture of what the economy can look like. Different industries, different size of businesses, different stages of business. It's all important. And I think if we can move there, then we'll start to see the economy and an economy that works for everybody.
Amazing. We're also going to bring in Ujaka Williams, who's going to tell us about Gilded, which is the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives' new freelancer worker co-op initiative. Very exciting. Ujaka is passionate about bridging the promise of cooperative business with the urgent social needs of Black and Brown people. And she's also an aspiring credit union founder. Yes. Very exciting. It's so important right now, Ujaka, to really give people the tools to think about how gig workers, precarious workers are organizing. Can you tell us a little bit about Gilded and the goals of the project and the initiative?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like you said, I'm Ujaka Williams, the project manager of Gilded. I think the notion and the current status of gig workers ties very well into the theme of the conference. Like, what is the future of work? It being a people's economy, and who are the people in this economy? The Federation has done a great job of showing an alternative to how normal employees can work. Normal employees can gain their ownership and governance of their workplace. And now we know that our society has been shifting, and we have a new sector of workers, freelancer workers, contingent workers, who don't have the same benefits as employees, and they need the same type of agency. So Gilded is an initiative. It's a freelancer cooperative launched to change the narrative around freelancing and contingent workers. So we want to empower freelancers and contingent workers to have agency in their workplace. That means governance, ability to make decisions, in addition to having economic power. Typically, society has shown, and with tech advances, that they try and position freelancers as just the service. So they abstract away the humanity and their agency, and they just make it a marketplace. So if you want something, you're not dealing with a human being like an Uber so much as you're just dealing with where you want to get to. And Gilded wants to change that narrative and use tech platforms to say, no, the tech platform is just the means. And what we're really concerned about is you, the freelancer, as a worker, because freelancing is growing throughout the states, and it's projected to continue to grow. So we need to take care of those workers.
You already have workers organizing on Gilded. Who have you guys started to engage?
So we're just in the beginning, and we're currently looking for more workers. We're starting with artist freelancers, specifically in the DMV and also Pennsylvania, because they tend to expand sectors. In addition, there aren't that many protections. So part of what Gilded wants to do is help freelancers with some of the burdens of being a freelancer. So that includes the administrative burden, where you have to deal with tracking down your clients, sometimes the difficulty of assuming that professional role with someone who might be your friend and saying, look, you have to pay, in addition to helping with some payment advancements, as well as helping them get benefits such as health insurance. So we're focusing mostly on artists and creatives right now. We're in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, in addition to the Pennsylvania, which we just recently launched.
Amazing, amazing. What kind of transformation have you seen in some of the artists? As someone who was in the music business and experienced a lot of the exploitation and extraction and killing of our collective imagination, I'm curious how the artists have felt transformed through participating in cooperative development.
Yeah, so since we're still in the beginning stages, I don't have that many stories, but I do know Gilded is based on a model that started in Belgium, where they had similar issues with the splitting of employee types, basically making second-class employees by people who don't have traditional employment status. And what they were able to do was to negotiate higher rates for their people who are their employees by standardizing and helping them with budgetary sheets so they know how much they should charge for the types of work they're doing, offset some of the lost wages that artists were getting because maybe their clients didn't pay. And in addition, reduce some of the financial burdens of being an artist, because being your own boss is not just you providing the service. You know, you take care of all the materials, you take care of the transportation costs needed for you to get from point A to point B to your client. And that's kind of the ecosystem that SMART in Belgium developed. And that's definitely what we're aiming to develop here in the States.
Can I ask, how large was this in Belgium? Can you give us a sense of how successful this was?
Yeah, it was so successful that they expanded to other countries. So they're now in like 8 to 10 different European countries, and they make several $1 million. It's not in dollars, but I don't know the euro conversion per year. And they're also able to do payment advancements. So before they even get the contracts to their before they get paid by their clients, they're able to advance the payments to their employees.
Wow. I'm seeing that there's over 120,000 users throughout Europe, and I'm just thinking of what the influence would be on our culture in the US if we had, you see Chance the Rapper asking about unionizing gas stations or unionizing labels, record labels. I guess in a dreamy space, how do you think that this can change our culture and how we think about artists as workers?
Yeah, I think it would do exactly as Marie said, where you bring the politics and also the tools you need in order to get real change into your workplace. So we're bringing it now to a freelancer cooperative where freelancers are routinely engaging in the process of making decisions. They're routinely engaging in what it means to be in their field. They have access to data where other freelancers are in the same field. How much are they making? What does it mean to live in different states? It'll serve kind of as an ignition point for organizing. So now you have the data, you have the connections and the local connections. You're able to push maybe other unions, because there are different creative and artistic unions that have been formed either in theater and other fields. You're able to push them so that you can change the narrative and provide more direction as to what your needs are as a freelancer, as opposed to being so beholden by what you think the power structure is and what you think they can give you given where they're tied up.
Transparency, amazing. So I'm going to bring all of us back in for a quick little 15 minutes left here. So we can talk about kind of, Maurice, you talked about this election, broadening our conceptions of democracy. And I'm wondering, how can we support communities campaigning for defunding the police to start painting more of a picture and developing demands for community reinvestment? I have a colleague at the New Economy Coalition, Sachi, who works for the Reinvest in Our Power network, who talks about it as a bridge. Defunding is the first half of the bridge, but half of the bridge doesn't get us to where we need to be. And so community reinvestment is that second half of the bridge. And I'm wondering where you've seen kind of those connections happening, how we can strengthen those connections from here.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And, there's some of us have been involved in the abolition movement for quite a long time now, right? And so, I want to bring up the work of Marian Kaba and the work of critical resistance and the work of many, like the intellectual labor that sort of brought us to this moment. Dr. Angela Davis, and underneath the calls to defund, underneath it, the political, ideological, and sort of intellectual sort of underpinnings is this idea around divesting and investing, right? And so the call defund, or the hashtag defund the police, is an intervention that I think allows us to, in a very popular way, have a real conversation about, in general, as a society, what are the things that we're divesting from, the things that hurt us, and how are we investing in the things that fortify us, that make us stronger, that keep us safe, and how are we focusing not so much on the police as an institution, but on public safety more broadly, and how do we create safe and vibrant communities? And I think when you shift the frame there, then it's very expansive. Because you can't have a safe and vibrant community where people are out of work or where people are being exploited at work. That certainly isn't safe. Where exploited laborers based on who they are in race, class, and gender could be abused on multiple levels. That certainly isn't safe. So if we want a safe community, then we collectively need to marshal our resources towards the things that we know make us safe. And you get there through starting off the conversation around defunding. And then now we're talking about changing social relations. Then we're talking about challenging capital. Then we're talking about what makes us whole as people, right? And so I think the defunding is an invitation to a much broader conversation, a much richer conversation. And I think it's happening. Just to bring it back down to the ground, we've already seen a lot of wins. And for folks, a lot of folks understand this. Policing happens on the local level. So as a political party, we're focused on the thousands of localities, the thousands of cities and towns. And, we started a project with the Movement for Black Lives called the WFP Justice Fund, where we're raising money from everyday people so that we could begin to challenge the money of police unions, so that we could fortify grassroots elected officials like Kendra Brooks in Philly, who's an independent working families city council person. She was a dissenter, a lone dissenter when the city council voted for another police budget, right? Fortifying those folks, giving them collective resources, and then flanking them, right? Flanking those elected officials who feel accountable and are in a co-governance relationship in order to defund the police, in order to shrink their power, shrink their influence, and shrink the amount of times they actually interact with us. So and then Kendra and others are able to have a conversation about public education, about workers' rights, about the communities that we want, and what we would do collectively with these resources if we were in control of these resources. So I think it's a powerful frame to get into this broader conversation about investment. And I think it could be applied in all types of ways. So we're finding ways to apply that invest divest frame, the defund frame, to climate justice and to climate change, because essentially what we're attempting to do is to defund the fossil fuel industry as a whole, decommission the fossil fuel industry, and then to reaffirm a regenerative economy, put those resources into a regenerative economy, and then to provide a transition, a just transition for all of those workers, right? That is using the same thinking of the defund the police sort of frame. So it's really an expansive frame. And once you get people thinking that these are all resources that we collectively marshal through government, then the question is, how do we want to manage it in order to fortify our communities?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I really appreciate you bringing up climate justice and also the legacy of abolition, because I think within cooperative economics, something that gets lost as well is the deep roots within this country, whether it's after emancipation, Black folks setting up mutual aid societies, to Ella Baker's work with the Young Negro Cooperative League in the 1930s, to now, the work that we're seeing across the country, whether it's the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance or Mandela Co-ops in Oakland. This is also, there's a long legacy in this country as well. I also want to shout out Jessica Gordon Nemhard's Collective Courage for those of you that are curious to learn more about that history, and ask kind of Philip and Ajaka what your thoughts were on Maurice's comments around defund, and how are you in your conversations, whether it's with investors, with artists, of connecting the dots between defund and reinvesting and doing these new practices?
I think there's a lot there. And I think, I'm newer. I was introduced to the divest invest frame recently. I love it so much. I mean, I think, as I mentioned before, there's this movement to say, how do we invest in a way that recognizes a new economy? And so we're sort of framing employee ownership as a crux of that. I think in the climate space, it was I don't want to say easier, but it was very much straightforward. Like, hey, we could divest from fossil fuels and we can see climate change changing here. And I think, inequality is such a broad word. It takes a long time to play out. And so we're trying to sort of tell that narrative. I think, but to Maurice's point, when you think about the jobs on the ground, that's sort of where it all starts. And we've recognized that. And one project that we did recently, I think on Monday, on Labor Day, was we released a job board of all, like, people forget, there's a lot of jobs today at employee-owned firms. And I think the challenge is that there was never a way to find them. You had to know the firm exists, you had to know about that co-op. And so what we did was we aggregated all those jobs. And I think it speaks directly to Maurice's point of, if we can make working at a place where workers have power in some form or fashion normal, then we'll start to see those democratic changes. And so I'd encourage folks to take a look at the board. And if you have a job that fits that vein, get it over to us so we can add to the board and share with more folks.
Ajaka, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful framing, and Maurice laid it out perfectly. I know here in DC, well, I'm in Maryland, but there was a whole tiff between the president and Mayor Bowser and the mural that was painted on the 16th Street, basically saying Black Lives Matter equals defund the police. And having the time to actually dissect what defund the police means, and taking the standpoint of, it's about marshaling resources, that's only possible if you have a sense of stability in your life. And having that sense of stability can only arise if you're in a workplace that gives that to you. And that's even more harder if you're a freelancer. So joining something like a freelancer cooperative, where the platform is there to help assist you in your livelihood, to make sure that the admin burden isn't just on you, is basically, it's the crux of what would help you to engage more fully in these economic discussions and be able to understand what it means. Because doesn't stop with just defund, and it doesn't just stop with a certain climate initiative, but it goes into, do I have the space to think about, what about my materials that I use in my art projects, that I'm jumping from one to another? Is there a more environmentally friendly way to collectively marshal resources for things like that? And you can't have that space if you're always in a mode of crisis.
Yep. We're wrapping up. I have one more question I'm hoping that we can fit in our time. But Maurice, what do you see that the Movement for Black Lives, Working Families Party needs from the cooperative movement, from the solidarity economy movement from here?
So I'm so excited about this juncture in our movements and sort of the maturation of the US movement, because we're really at the place where we can no longer sort of tolerate living and working in silos. We're not siloed people. So, my mom, she's an immigrant. She's also Black. She was also an 1199 union member, rank and file at St. John's Episcopal Hospital. I am all of my identities. And I struggle through this life holding all of my identities. That's true for all of us. So the thing that I most want is to challenge all of us to push through some of the very limited and siloed ways that we think about our work, when we know we don't live limited and siloed realities, right? And let's try to figure out what multiple membership of multiple political homes and movement homes looks like. So I want to grow the rank and file membership of the Working Families Party as much as possible, but I also want to do it. There is no Working Families Party without a vibrant labor movement, and without vibrant worker co-ops, and without vibrant grassroots movements, and without vibrant grassroots organizations. So I want to do it in a way where we're building one another. I've often said that this is an all hands, no elbows moment. This is a time where there's plenty of space for folks to figure out their lane and to collaborate and to see each other as comrades, right? Like, I'm in a place where if you are truly rooted in the same struggle that I'm in, then there's no competition between us, right? There might be disagreements, and there should be, because, you know, steel sharpens steel, but there's no competition, right? There are more than 300 million people. We all need to get free. There's enough room for everybody. And we're ultimately at a war with organized capital and white supremacists. And if we have a proper power analysis, we understand that that the stakes are real. This is not a drill. And so I feel like those conditions actually are ideal for us to collaborate. So what I want to see is an environment where our movement is using worker power, using the power of protest, using the vote, using the ability for workers to become elected officials and practice co-governance as multiple tools in the same power struggle. So, you know, I grew up in a Caribbean immigrant household. We don't look, we use all the tools we have at our disposal. And I want that type of generosity of spirit and innovation to be sort of the norm in how we operate and work with one another.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so excited of where we're going from here. And I want to thank you all, Philip, Ajaka, Maurice. I also want to shout out for those that don't know, the New Economy Coalition last year put out a policy toolkit, very relevant to this call, called Pathways to a People's Economy. It's not everything that we need to do, but it's a really great start in how we actually can advocate our elected officials around building worker ownership, around housing, around energy, and around climate. So I really want to encourage folks to check out peopleseconomy.org. And thank you all for joining me in this conversation. I hope we will continue to build and be on the offense together. Take it away, Esteban.
That's right. And, you know, our original vision was to have this conference in person in Philly, to connect with Working Families Party, actually to mobilize people who came to town for the conference to linger, either to come early or to linger, and to get into vans and to go do door knocking in the swing state of Pennsylvania, just to make sure that people were registered, that they were informed and mobilized to get out the vote. So I want to bring that energy here. Thank you so much, Maurice. People can definitely connect with the voting project that Working Families Party is organizing, as well as Co-ops Vote, which is a campaign, a mobilizing campaign that we're involved with, the National Cooperative Business Association, and all our other cooperative homies, including the rural electric cooperatives, to mobilize people. Don't forget to fill out the census, y'all. And with that, I'm actually going to transition us to, thanks everybody. I'm going to wave you off. I'm going to invite on a board member from the Democracy at Work Institute, and one of our active members from one of our grassroots member councils for the MIC Council, the Movimiento de Migrantes Cooperativas, Eladio. And we're going to switch to Spanish. Come back. We're going to switch to Spanish for this closeout poem. Thanks so much. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Esteban. Well, welcome everyone. We have the second day of the conference. as Esteban was saying, my name is Eulalio, and I'm co-founder of the Hour and a Half Landscape and Cooperative in Boston. And today I'm gonna share a poem that was written by William Hamley, which is the most famous poem of Henley, which was written that the year that he died. These were transcendent because he was telling them to himself in his years in prison due to the racist policies in South Africa. And one of the most important people or leaders in the 20th century is based on the wise words of the English words, who doesn't stand back to look at the jewels of the human existence, which are hope, freedom, and resistance. So here it goes. So this is beyond the night that covers me, black as an unfathomable abyss. I thank the gods that they can exist by my unconquerable soul. In the random clutches of circumstances, I have not moaned or cried. Subjected to the blows by chance, my head is bleeding, but it is standing upright. Beyond this place of anger and weeping lies but the horror of the shadow. And even the threat of the years finds me and will find me without fear. No matter how narrow the door, how loaded with punishment the sentence is, I am the master of my destiny. I am the captain of my soul. Original is Invictus. Thank you. And let's go back with Esteban.
Thank you so much, Eulalio. And thank you everyone for tuning in to our welcome and to our keynote. We are so thankful for your presence and for you all joining us this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending where you're watching from. A couple of reminders before we transition into the next part of the conference. We remind you that there is an opportunity to support the worker co-op movement by becoming a sustainer for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. Your support and your donation really help to make this work continue and for us to bring you wonderful keynotes, for us to do policy work around worker cooperatives, for us to put on programs and trainings for our members and to build alliances with movement organizations. So please consider becoming a sustainer for the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. To get more information, join usworker.coop